We are back for another episode, and this one is basically if a picture is worth 1,000 words, that's a solid foundation. We've chatted about photography before on the podcast. We will pop link to that previous episode in the notes in case you haven't caught it yourself before. But what struck us from that conversation was how powerful photography can be for your business when it's used strategically and forms your business foundations. So, rooting those photo shoots into your brand story and identity can deliver far more impact. And we knew fellow creative Samantha would have a ton of gold dust to bring to this conversation. So, we roped her into joining us for this chat.
It indeed. So in case you don't know Samantha already, so Samantha Couzens is a food photographer for the founders that are doing things differently, which is what we love about her. She's helped clients launch apps, land cookbook deals, and get their products onto supermarket shelves, from foodie startups to household brand names. Samantha has helped them show up confidently with imagery they love and that builds trust, loyalty, and most importantly, connection with their customers. Samantha doesn't produce imagery for image's sake. She loves to explore what food really is: love, community, health, happiness, joy, and freedom. So welcome. We are delighted to have you with us.
Thank you very much for having me. That was a lovely little intro.
I think it highlights several things that we'll probably come on to during the podcast, but certainly like your take on food photography or food in general, I think, and that kind of connection piece is probably why you're such a kind of kindred creative in this. We have similar values, so
yeah,
I think that connection's there.
Yeah, I do. I think there's so much to food, I think, than just food on the table. And it's nice to just work with it and then use photos to communicate that to the people that my clients and brands are trying to speak to. It's a good job.
Well, hopefully you get to eat the leftovers, and that's one of the things that makes it such a good job.
That is one of the perks, is that everything is eaten. I can guarantee that.
You have some very grateful neighbours.
Absolutely.
Is it shoot day today?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The hardest thing though is actually doing the shoot and not being able to eat it while you're doing it. Because you can't go in for one tiny little bite and then you realize, oh, we haven't actually got that image on the shot list. So I always have a snack plate to one side while I'm shooting, and then everything that's actually shot on the day gets eaten later. And we have stickers in our fridge now as well, which means this is shoot food, please don't eat.
Good point.
Yeah,
I bet there's been some accidents before that system was put in place.
Yeah, my dad came over actually the other day and he was dog sitting while we went out for dinner, and he ate one of the client yogurts in the fridge. So I had to come home and tell him that was saved for a shoot, but never mind.
Yeah, the joys of working with a sort of live as such produce, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Oh. So how should we start off with how you came into food photography?
Yeah. So it started from a love of food. It kind of slowly evolved. I went off to uni, I started cooking for myself and I loved it. And then people started asking for the recipes, so I would share them with my friends and family. And then someone suggested, oh, you should take some photos and put them on a website. And just very slowly, I started kind of doing that and had a food blog way back when, and was working in marketing, theatre and marketing and advertising in London at the time. And it was a fine job, but I didn't love it and wanted to do something for myself. And so I moved into a very small health and wellness marketing agency, which I think was our first connection, but correct me if I'm wrong, it might have been Vicky Shilling. Good old Vicky Shilling. I feel like she's in every podcast interview.
She is like, however many steps removed from Kevin Bacon. It's like, we played the game with Vicky Shilling.
Yeah. So yeah, I moved into that very small business. There was only 3 of us at the time, and worked with lots of small brands within the food and wellness space. And again, started taking photos for them and just gradually grew. And that role was going to change slightly and become more events focused, which wasn't something that I was particularly interested in. So I took the leap and quit in 2019, just a few months before COVID, and set up my own business. And then somehow made it through COVID, kind of working with smaller brands and doing the food photography. Yeah. And from there, it's grown and grown and grown. And I can't quite believe I'm doing it for more than 5 years now. It's unbelievable.
Wow. Yeah, feels like it's gone quick, but
Yeah.
I was trying to think back actually to where the first connection was, and
Yeah.
right, it's a long, long time ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it was an event or something.
I think it was the Health Bloggers Summit for me and you.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you and Sammy, it might be different.
Yeah. And then there was quite a lot of crossover, I think, that we'd met once, and then we went to another event with, I think I went along with Vicky and you were there, and all those kind of
Yeah.
slowly kind of came closer and closer together.
Yeah, because I went to a Health Bloggers Summit, and that's where I first saw Vicky, but didn't know Vicky. So it's kind of like I was in that arena, but without kind of made all those connections. So it's kind of funny how it all sort of, I kind of did like a little dance around the outside, and then was kind of like, and then everyone started connecting inside. So
yeah, so that's how I kind of stumbled in.
And here you are,
working
with startups and household names.
Yeah, it has grown massively. I'm working with, I still work with the smaller brands. It's kind of half and half, but yeah, some really big, more kind of corporate clients, I suppose, in big studio jobs, which was just it was such a dream of mine at the beginning. And I think probably one of those dreams that I thought, I'll put it on my, vision board and my notebook and dream of it for the future, but didn't really think I'd actually get there. So yeah, it's huge, especially as the learning curve for the actual equipment was massive for me. I'd never picked up a camera before. I hadn't come at it from a photography standpoint or done any kind of training in that. So I really learnt everything that I needed in order to communicate what I wanted to communicate with the food. I've said this a lot, but it's like a means to an end, learning what I had to learn to achieve what was kind of creatively in my brain. So yeah, I'm proud of myself for that.
Yeah, and I think that's such a nice way, like we can get caught up of like, I haven't done the official training, or I'm not, qualified in certain people's eyes or things like that, but it brings such a different viewpoint and a freshness, I think it's really nice when you're not bound by the do's and don'ts if you're kind of trained specifically in that way, if you know what I mean. Like you kind of break the rules without even knowing it, because you just come at it as a completely fresh perspective.
Yeah, and you just inevitably have your own take on it.
Yeah,
not following another kind of rule book.
Yeah, which I think is important in terms of how you stand out as a photographer, but also what you bring to the brands that you're working with.
Yeah, and it's all problem solving as well. So it's actually quite hard if you go in with a very strict idea of what you want to do. It never goes to plan. So it's better to be comfortable with kind of making do and working it out as you go along than it is to only know a certain way of doing it and then panic when you're outside of those boundaries. I've had my fair share of shoots where I'm quickly Googling something or YouTubing something or,
how do I do this?
Yeah, getting stuck with a particular setting or something. But it's getting used to that makes it easier. Being uncomfortable and outside of those the kind of safety structures, I suppose, and learning on the job. It's a really good skill set to kind of develop.
How different is it? Because I guess when you started, you were creating the food at home. You had your own kind of like home studio, which I guess probably helped during COVID when you couldn't really go into an external studio. How different is that to working in a studio?
It is very different. They're both lovely. So I like working from home with smaller brands, and it's done remotely. So this was obviously something I set up during COVID, but working out a way to create a brief and a mood board so that we're both very clear on what's going to be achieved, and then working to that during the day and sending over examples of the images and keeping up to date with the clients so they can approve as we go. But that is all the cooking at home. and styling everything, and all the props and the lighting, everything is all done by me at home. So they are really nice jobs because it involves a lot of the things that I really enjoy. And then the bigger studio jobs, which I do half the time now, are also great, but in a very different way. So I get to work with a much bigger team. And I have a food stylist that I work with on most jobs now. So I'm working with the client team, and we get to meet them and interact and kind of understand what they're looking to achieve. And then I bring in my food stylist and often her assistant as well. So the assistant's generally cooking and cleaning up after each shot, and the stylist is actually styling the food on set. So it just means you're able to kind of power through the images and the recipes much quicker because there's all three of you working on, an individual part as everything kind of shifts along. And again, in big, studio spaces with beautiful kitchens and lovely light and all that equipment. So it's definitely very different, but there are perks to both. I enjoy both for kind of different reasons.
And has it shaped how you approach food? Because obviously you came at it from a love of food. Has working with these different brands and foodie things and different recipes and stuff altered how you work with food yourself?
That's a good question. I don't think so. I think I still get that same joy out of food. It's lovely working with the smaller brands who have such a passion. Often they've never done a photo shoot before and have been saving for a very long time and have been dreaming of it and thinking about it a lot. And it's finally their vision coming to life, and they love everything about it, being able to witness all the food prep if they're with me, and just seeing everything kind of come to life is very exciting. So that working with food in that way and preparing everything and styling it for them is a great feeling. But then also on set, I think maybe during the actual shoot, you get very caught up on the tiny details and everything really matters. So you maybe lose sight of the overall kind of feeling and emotion of food. But then you all sit down for a shoot lunch, which I think is one of my favorite parts of a shoot day, because everybody kind of downs tools and comes together. And it's a great little reminder in the middle of the day as to why you're doing this and why it actually matters and what you're trying to ultimately get your customers and clients to do, which is buy your food and take it home and cook it and sit down around a table with people and share it and talk and, switch off from all the other craziness that's kind of going on in the world. So I think it has strengthened my relationship with food in general.
Oh my goodness, there's so many parallels there in what you're saying about that, getting fixated on the minutiae and losing sight of the bigger picture, and then bringing them all in around a table to remember that why that is the work that we're all doing in slightly different ways.
Yeah. And it's so simple, really. It's a basic human need that we all have, and food is such a fantastic leveler. It doesn't really matter what's going on. We all eat something with someone at some point, and that means different things to different people. But I just think it can communicate so much. And that's why it's such a nice thing to work with, because if you approach it in the right way, you can really say things to other people and evoke emotion in them. It's quite a powerful tool.
Yeah, definitely. I think I can just kind of imagine. I've just got like visions of like a kind of big Italian family, they're so massive on like all everyone round, people bringing dishes and it being like, I think I know when I was sort of doing my bit of study into nutrition a few years ago, and it was sort of like the amount of time actually we spend sitting and eating food is so small compared to other countries where food is still kind of quite a big community, family, whoever that family is to you, like such a big event, and it's actually several hours rather than 10 minutes here, a quick sandwich there. And I think it's I've seen it myself. I was very, very lucky to be brought up in a family where we always ate together. Whether my dad was coming home late from work, we would wait and we would eat together. And I didn't appreciate at the time just how important that is, because everybody got to talk about their day, and you
Yeah.
had that connection. It wasn't like I was in bed and Dad come home from work late and we never saw each other. It was, we all had that time together to share.
Yeah. And I love the idea, like those snapshots of a table of all the things that kind of can be happening. Like you're either just eating and sharing, but you fall in love across a table, on dates across a table, you sip drinks across a table, all that kind of stuff. And then you argue and, have those crazy family dinners where everybody's driving you mad. There's so much noise and spills and mess and mistakes, and there's just so much around that tiny little area. Yeah, I think it's a nice visual, a table. I always thought I'd start a marketing business called table marketing, but maybe I'll table it for later.
So I guess in terms of, maybe bringing it back to sort of working with businesses, working with brands, but working with the actual people. Obviously, getting to that point where you're having a shoot done, obviously, is quite a big thing. Do you see, or what kind of mindset blocks do you see with people maybe like getting in front of the camera if you're working with a founder or
Yeah.
business owner?
I think there's a lot of things. There's, I suppose, more relevant to personal brand photography. So when it's a photo of a person, I don't find, with the kind of foodie clients and the foodie founders, they're maybe a little bit more confident to come across, to come in, like in front of the camera if they've actually got food or they're working with food in that kind of way. But when it is just photos of you, I think that, well, the first one is we just worry we don't look good enough. Everybody seems to be nervous to have their photo taken, worried about how they might look, especially women kind of just struggling to accept themselves as they are on that particular day, and maybe delaying a shoot or not wanting to get in front of the camera until they feel they look a certain way. And I think there's also a bit of a block with not wanting to spend the money on it and not seeing that value in the return, because they're not used to prioritizing themselves or being proud of themselves, or saying I'm going to put this money towards looking professional and of high quality, and showcasing that. Instead, we kind of want to hide away and keep ourselves separate from the business and just show the food because that's easier, and we get all kind of worked up about being on show. But I think if you can, I always say it's like looking as good as you say you are. So if you've got this huge passion for your business, be that your own personal business and you're having personal branding photography, or you're a founder of a food business and you're trying to get imagery for that. Either way, you want to communicate to everybody out there that your product and your service is as good as the passion that you have for it. And if you never invest in your imagery and you never update those visuals and it's always DIY, then there's a bit of a mismatch that's not being communicated very well. So it's somehow taking yourself a little bit more seriously and being willing to invest and put the time in and the bravery to kind of get in front of the camera, and value what you've got enough to think, yes, it's worth communicating that and getting out in front of people and showing that it is actually as good as I know it is at its very core.
And I think that's a really big part of the connection, isn't it? Obviously, connecting with people, we like to see who is behind the business. And as much as that might feel uncomfortable, it is how you build that sort of, connection and trust. And I know as a web designer, having really good imagery is amazing and it's a game changer. It elevates the whole project. And
Yeah.
I don't like to put people off, getting started if they haven't got amazing photography, but I think, everyone's got to start somewhere. But I think it is potentially, as you say, like overlooked value piece,
Yeah.
because it really does, it's like the professionalism, but also I think what a photographer brings, like how it can capture. It says, well, as the podcast is titled, it says a thousand words. Like you can just capture that moment, you can capture that emotion, you can capture that feeling, which I think is really special.
Yeah.
and can help translate those values
Yeah.
to the imagery to the audience.
Yeah. And I think people maybe underestimate the power of it as well. We quite often see it as a finishing touch or a nice to have, to just have some professional photos for the sake of it. But like you say, if you do it properly, you can communicate so much in it. And that definitely goes for the food styling and the food photography that I do. But I was actually, in preparation for this, I was just having a look at all your images and your websites and stuff. And I just wrote down words that kind of came to mind, because we don't necessarily think about it, and we don't look at images and write down words and go, oh, this is what it's communicating to me. But I thought it was a good example of how it does evoke certain emotions and it does get you kind of thinking. So should I do both of them? Do you want to hear what I wrote down?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just as an example. So with Sammy's images, I saw lots of sunshine, light, ease. They felt very welcoming, very kind, gentle, aspirational, and quiet. So that's kind of all the stuff that came up. And in my mind, that kind of gives this impression of your service, which would be that you would listen, that you would take care and time over your work, and that it would feel very joyful and very easy and very light. So although people aren't looking at your images and going, this is what I'm going to do because of all those things, that's happening in your brain without people thinking about it. Like all of these, I think it's 95% of your purchasing decisions are made in your mind, like with your emotion, not made in your mind. All decisions are made in your mind, but made with the emotional part of your brain,
yeah, that kind of
rather than the
subconscious.
analytical, strategic, the logical thinking part. So lots of those decisions are just being made without you really thinking about it. And that's what we mean when you say you look at an image and it communicates something and you feel something as a result. That's what's going on. And then Lee, yours were crafted, artisanal. I put there's an old school sophistication to it. Suggests patience, honesty, and authenticity, but with a hint of playful sarcasm and quirk. And then I said that gives the impression that the experience will be unique, perfectly tailored to an individual, but that it would also be fun and enjoyable and would potentially unearth something new about someone's truest self. So it's like, you're not writing any of that down, telling that to everybody, but if you do it right, your images are communicating that to people. Same with food, if you style it in a particular way, use particular lighting, give it that kind of nostalgic feel, or create something very soft and calming, you communicate something to the people that you want to work with, and then they make that decision based on that, and they go and buy your product or they buy your service. Or
Yeah, it's so powerful. And it's kind of weird because it's almost as if you're like a fortune teller there with our websites. You've literally nailed us completely. And so much so that Lee nearly spat out her water with the sarcasm bit. But like one of my favorite, I've got lots of favorite photos of yours. And obviously I was lucky enough to work with your portfolio pieces on your website. But that shot of I think it's the guy making bread and he's sort of like the flowers like dusting off his hands. It's such a it brings you right into the kitchen. You're right there with them, but you can almost smell the bread. Like it's amazing. And obviously I guess with food it's very sensory anyway.
Yeah.
But it is amazing how that does just communicate something. And straight away you would think of kind of artisanal, handmade, it's somebody's taking care and love over crafting this piece of bread. It's so much so different from a loaf sitting on a supermarket shelf.
That is something I worry about as well, with the kind of trends in food photography at the moment. A lot of it is going very kind of bold and quite abstract and very colourful, but it's all products flying in the air and things shooting out of them, and it's not food in its truest way. It's not real food, and it worries me with the food industry because a lot of food doesn't feel like it's real food anymore. We're kind of moving into this very weird world of convenience food and stuff that just ticks the fuel box but doesn't really do anything else.
Doesn't nourish you.
Yeah, and there's a lot out there, and then I see smaller brands that are starting up adopt that style because they think that's what everybody is doing and that's what they should be doing in order to stand out. But I generally don't work with a lot of brands like that. I work with the people that are still kind of making real food and want that to feel homemade and want to evoke emotion in the kind of recipes and things that they're kind of creating. But I think it works, that bold color pop stuff works if that's your brand. If your brand is very loud and brash and bold and quite confident. But if you're, a artisanal bread company that creates slow cooked, beautiful loaves of bread and it's meant to feel mindful and purposeful, you couldn't slap that on a pink background and put a crazy shadow and some flour exploding out of it. But it's not really communicating what actually matters to you and what your unique brand is about. So it's about sticking true to what matters to you and communicating that and not trying to follow a trend.
Yeah, and I think that ties in very much with how both Lee and I work in terms of thinking about your audience and who is going to be, the end sort of buyer. So obviously those that are going to appreciate the slow fermented bread that's been, carefully crafted with really quality ingredients over 2 days, for example, is not going to be the same person that's out for a quick, bright, flashy snack kind of thing.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
It's tying those two things in, isn't it? Of like, how you want to come at it, what your brand values are trying to communicate, or what you're trying to communicate, through the imagery, and also who's going to resonate, your audience, who's going to actually resonate and be the end purchaser of it.
And not giving up on that just because there's less of it at the moment. Not thinking I won't go down that route because, a lot of people aren't really doing it and maybe it's a bit outdated. Having the confidence to stay true to what's yourself. Because I think it will come round as well. We'll have a period of time where it's all a bit more fake and abstract and unusual, and it will wind back to the real, honest, depiction of things. I think anyway, that's what I like. So
I'm fully with you as someone who keeps hearing oh, you're all going to be replaced, AI is going to take your jobs, yada 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 thing. Okay, I'm just going to carry on doing things the old-fashioned way, because I see the value in it, and my clients still see the value in it. And I think you'll probably swing back this way, but it's cool if you choose to continue in that direction. That's fine. You do you.
Yeah.
I think there's a big authenticity piece there, or and I think it's human nature, in terms of just safety mechanism, that we know when something's off, and that's what I struggle with AI imagery. Like sometimes it's meant to be fantastical and otherworldly, and that's great because it does take you to other worlds. But when it's something that's trying to be real, you just know. And I think that it potentially, depending on who you are and what you want to do, but certainly from my perspective, when I like to work, I think that's going to break down trust. I think people are going to find it harder to trust you if there's something that feels off, because I think it's just in us as humans to know that something's not quite right, and do we trust it? That's just a very instinctive reaction. And I think I've always been one for very much kind of good presentation, but again, there's a line to be drawn between something super polished and something that actually is more relatable and authentic. We're not all polished versions of ourselves. And I think it's just getting that nice balance is really important, on kind of where the magic is. And I think that's exactly kind of how you're talking about your photography.
I definitely agree. Just trying to find that the honesty in it, and not losing sight of it. And like you say, and there is just so much now that's not trustworthy. Like you say, something's off. So doing what you can to create things in a way that feels good to you, that is truthful and honest, and like that being okay. I think there will be a world of AI, and I think things will lots of things will stay as they are. In the same way, like the internet came about, that completely changed the world as we know it. I still love to read a book. I still love to make something with my hands. I still love to cook. There's lots of more analog, I suppose, things that I still really enjoy. And I hope that is the case. AI will be fantastic for brands who have a product and they need to get a load of product imagery together very quickly and at a more affordable price. And, it will be very helpful. But there will also be instances where that real kind of cooking and recipe focused food will still need to be made and shared and feel less polished.
Yeah, so it's the honesty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm intrigued to see what happens with people photography as well, because sure, you could get a photo of yourself and then say superimpose it into all these different environments, and AI creates all these different images, but I do wonder whether that won't feel real enough for the person sharing it. So if it were me getting some imagery together for my website, I want to know that they're true images of me and that I've had that experience myself with a photographer in an environment that felt good. But we'll see. We'll do another podcast in 20 years' time from, I don't know, space or something.
But I hope not. Yeah, well, that went quite deep.
So basically, we're all quite wary of imitation, from handbags to, our identities being cloned. Why would we gravitate towards these images and copy and whatever else that is clearly trying to imitate or mimic us, as opposed to something that is real? And I think we need to hold trends a little bit more lightly. Like, you can have an awareness of them without having to implement all of them. A bit like, I think we were talking about best practice at the beginning of how you actually get into the industry. All of us are kind of, we've learned as we've gone along, rather than having degrees and whatever. I think you can know what, say, marketing best practice is without drowning yourself in trying to implement all of marketing best practice across your business, because particularly in a small business, it's not attainable or necessary most of the time.
And we would miss out on actually enjoying the process as well. It might be effective and easy to hand it over to some kind of AI system or something, but I really enjoy the process of my work. I want to be involved in it. I want to do lots of it myself. I feel like that gives me a sense of like purpose and agency. And I don't want everything to just be really easy and boring and, a kind of system that you follow and just chuck in a few keywords and create. I want to be a part of that creation. I want it to be messy and imperfect and fun and challenging and all those things.
Yeah, I think that's what makes human intervention so important.
Yeah.
So, real human photography, big deal. What can investing in that imagery and having that bank of glorious, genuine images do for your brand, or for the kind of people that you work with? What sort of things have you seen them go on to achieve? Because I know it's really hard to attribute. I know you were talking about people save up for photography and it's a big investment. And as we say with all marketing things, it really can be really quite difficult to attribute that and say that investment generated X, Y, and Z for you, because we're slightly further removed from that sort of activity. But what sorts of things have you seen clients go on and do once they have that photography in place?
I think the biggest thing that I work with a lot of my clients on is securing investment. So we will quite often create pitch documents together with a very clear idea of the images that they need. So they'll often need product-based images to showcase what the product actually looks like and how you would use that at your table or in your cooking. So product only and then product with food. But then also more of those lifestyle, emotional, emotion evoking imagery that helps people really imagine what it would be like to use that or to eat it or whatever. So we create very clear imagery to communicate lots of different things and then put them together into a pitch document. And then that brand will go and raise investment in order to build their brand to the next level. So quite often that's then scaling their manufacturing and getting them, factories or massive orders that they can then fulfill. And then that tends to go towards supermarket listings as well. So there was one client that I worked with a couple of years ago, and she secured £100,000 of investment post photo shoot with the images and the pitch document that we created. And we can attribute that to that kind of decision. Obviously, lots goes into it, but without those images, you're not connecting with people in that same way. You're not switching on their kind of emotional brain, and they're not that invested. And I always think that's so true of cookbooks as well. You don't really cook a recipe out of a cookbook if there is no photo, because you don't know really what to.
I can't do it.
No, exactly. You don't know what it's going to look like.
Yeah.
You don't know, if you don't know what it's going to look like, you actually don't know if it's that appealing. I find it very hard. If you showed me an image of something to say, would you like to eat this? I would know yes or no whether I want to. If you wrote out the instructions and the ingredients, would you like to eat this? I'd be like, well, I like that, but I'm not sure how that, you don't actually know whether that's something
you can't really conceptualize it. Like, what's that actually meal going to be like? Yeah, it's a funny thing.
Yeah, so those images are just so powerful. They communicate so much. And I've helped clients land cookbook deals as well. You put together a pitch document, and based on the imagery and the recipes that you've created and the little bio and story of the recipe creator, then the publishing team makes that decision. And eventually getting products onto shelves as well. I suppose that's less clear cut because there's lots of steps that are taken. But yeah, it definitely helps because it's something that those supermarkets are asking for. They want to see your imagery. So if it didn't matter, then they wouldn't ask for it.
Yeah, I can imagine that being a barrier to that up level, because you do need to, obviously it's a very, very competitive area, and that level of professionalism obviously is important at that stage if you want to. So I can imagine imagery would become a barrier to actually getting to that next stage for a lot of businesses.
Definitely. I think there's that kind of professionalism and the quality that is hard to achieve if it's just a DIY option. Brands are doing their best with what they've got, and they'll get them so far. But there does come a point, it's, if you want to print something in a supermarket on an end, on a end of the aisle or something, you have to have a photo that's of high quality enough to actually have it printed. You can't have that being blurry. There's lots of, there's actually comes a point where it's really important that it's professionally done and it's of high enough quality to be printed or whatever. But I think also it just gives you a sense of confidence and pride in your brand when you make that decision. I very recently worked with a small company based in Scotland, and they'd never invested in photography before and had always wanted to, but just hadn't found the budget. And they'd just done a rebrand of their products, but they'd worked with somebody to kind of tell them, here is where you're falling short, and this is what you need to focus on, and this is what's doing really well. And so the product came out really well. It was it had fantastic reviews and it was selling very well, but imagery and their visual presence was letting them down. And so they were said, go and here's a list of all the things we need to get in order to put them on the website and put them on your social media and put them on the packaging. That's another big one. And just the day was great, working through all those images with two people that really, really cared about what they were doing was really good fun. But the best thing is then sending those images over and within half an hour, so many of them are already on their website and they've got them scheduled to social media because they're just so excited to finally share who they are really confidently, rather than having, on your Monday to-do list, I need to share an image to Instagram, but I don't particularly like any of the ones I've got, and that'll do. Whereas this is like, I can't wait for the next week to roll around because we've finally got what we need and we feel really great about it. And I think people show up more confidently then.
Yeah, they've got something that they're really proud of, and the
Yeah.
way it's portrayed makes a
Yeah.
big difference. Yeah.
Yeah. And same goes
the
for
whole energy.
personal photography as well. You do have that bank of imagery that you feel really good about. It just makes everything so much easier.
Yeah. There's nothing worse than obviously we work with quite a lot of clients that get to that point of kind of like, I don't want to send people to my website anymore. Like I just don't feel good about it. And you can see it just ripples through the whole business, when they're not proud, and then the different level of confidence is, well, there's a client I worked with recently, that kind of massive shift, and that's what makes the job so magical. Like that's what really, to see that sort of transformation, someone being really proud to share what they're doing is the best feeling. It's so lovely to be part of that journey.
Yeah. And then I think you're braver to go for bigger opportunities as well. You wouldn't think twice if you've got that, if you've got a bank of imagery for your brand that feels really good, and then an accelerator program comes up or something comes up, an opportunity to work with a supermarket or something. You just don't really think twice. You're just ready to go. Whereas if you know that you've got a folder of imagery and you're like, well, I'm not really sure what I'll share, so I'll just let that email slowly go down the list, fall out of my inbox, and you don't show up in that same way.
Yeah. Shows you how powerful it is.
Yeah, it is incredibly powerful. And even, there's, like we were saying, attributing very specific things to the imagery, but even just the power of capturing the moment and the story, like you were saying, Lee, like it's that sensory experience, that all of that's actually important too. And will make you feel a certain way about your brand and still gives you that pride in the products that you have. And just does such a fantastic job of connecting with the people that you want to buy. The more of that you can share, the more people will buy.
Absolutely. How do you think that feeds into kind of like their USP, kind of how do brands stand out in a really competitive market?
I think really the only way to do it is to not stray from your core brand values. Get as clear as you possibly can on what they are and never let a trend sway you. Just stick to what your messages are and work on communicating those. Because if you confuse your customers, if they're unsure of what you're offering them, then they won't buy. And if you can do it enough, if you're consistently sharing that same visual kind of feel across all of your channels, it will come to build trust in those people and they will consistently buy again. And I think we kind of get it wrong by thinking standing out is doing something big and flashy and showy and becoming famous and going viral. Whereas I actually think what it takes to stand out is to consistently do smaller things that kind of reinforce that connection with your customers. So it's never straying from your core brand values and the style of imagery and the way you want to kind of share yourself with the world, is staying true to that and consistently reinforcing that, so that over time it gradually grows and you gradually become known for something. Because confused customers won't buy. If you do one thing for 6 months and then you switch up and change and do something else, and they kind of lose interest and aren't actually sure what you're offering.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I would say, is not seeing it as a big thing, but lots of little small things.
And I think that would you agree that that takes some bravery, actually? Like it's the harder route in a way to really stay true rather than kind of getting pulled off with like, oh, that's what they're doing, so we'll do this. But actually staying true to who you are.
Yeah. Especially because the way things go viral, you think that almost everybody has had their viral moment and you're doing something wrong if it's not happened for you. But actually the majority aren't creating viral content all the time. You know, most are consistently plodding along with the right people finding them and gradually growing.
And viral content doesn't necessarily translate to sales either. It's all well and good having like the most amount of clicks or the most amount of shares, but actually if no one's actually engaging with you and buying your product or your service, then
yeah,
it's not really going to help you long term, like bottom line wise.
no, exactly.
Or build a relationship because it's just clickbait, isn't it, really?
Yeah. It's that relationship that is important. That's why they like household brand. That's why Lidl and Aldi suit so well, is because they basically mimic brands that people trust. Which that's
I still don't know how they get away with it.
I know, but that like it's they're not they've just been around for so long, those brands, that we come to almost understand their logos and we just know what their colors are without even really thinking about it. That's just a really consistent practice. And you can get that same kind of thing. People now can spot my imagery. They know it's shot by me. And that's not anything I've necessarily done to create that. I've just stayed true to what I enjoy and worked with the kind of clients that like that and have created, lots of portfolio imagery that I believe, communicates who I am, and people can recognize it now. So you just, you have to put the blinkers on and do what feels good to you and let that naturally grow.
What one thing would you want listeners to take away from this episode? So if we started the phrase, dear soulful business owner, because obviously a lot of our listeners are lovely soulful business owners, I wish you knew this, how would you fill it?
I had a good think about this, but I would say to focus on how you want people to feel first, and then use that to inspire all other creative choices with your photography, but even wider in your brand as well. I think we've talked about it a lot, but if you really do tap into that authenticity and that honesty, rather than chasing trends or doing what you think everybody else is doing and you should be doing, that I think is really the only true way for your brand to succeed, but also for you to feel a sense of success in yourself. So how do you want people to feel first, and then decide on everything else and how that's going to look later?